Member for Lalor.
Mr. Speaker, and I rise today to speak on the matter of public importance, and it is certainly important to the residents of Lalor. 66% of workers in Lalor use their car to get to work. Like those people who live in the electorate of Scullin, and like the member for Scullin pointed out, my electorate's on the outer suburbs of Melbourne, on the opposite side of the city to the member for Scullin. Out in the outer west of Melbourne, we have limited public transport. We have incredible high growth areas where we have affordable housing but limited jobs, which means that we have people travelling a long way to get to work. We have people travelling, juggling childcare, school drop-off and the work trip. They will be hurt by the measures put in by this government. They will be seriously hurt. They are feeling ambushed today by this government because this government promised no new or increased taxes. And I asked, as I asked many months ago, was that a solemn promise? Was it as solemn as the no cuts to education promise? Was it as solid as the no cuts to health promise? It is very difficult these days to tell which promise those opposites meant and which they didn't. And we hear a lot about the promises they have kept, but the promises that they made that they are breaking are mounting up day by day. And the people who live in my electorate are getting more and more cynical about this government, very cynical after the campaign that they ran on cost of living pressures, very cynical when they pick up a newspaper to find out that the Treasurer has said that poor people don't drive cars. 66% in an electorate with over 200,000 people drive cars to work every day. And the people of Lalor, of course, are most concerned about the compounding nature of the impacts that they're being hit with in this government's budget, because layer upon layer, each level hurts more and more. And this is all, Deputy Speaker, in a context where wages growth has been the slowest in 17 years. 17 years. And yet, every day, they are going to be hit harder and harder by the budget that this government is determined to get through. And I'm reminded of the rationale, of course, about that budget emergency that they have screamed about inside this chamber for months. But no one is swallowing that. The facts have been checked, and no matter how many times you try and force-feed us, we won't swallow it anymore. What is clear, however, is this government's priorities. What is clear from their budget is that the ordinary Australian is not the priority of this government. And I go to the Australian Automobile Association, which of course has had a bit to say today. The Chief Executive, Andrew McCullough, has called the petrol move weak, sneaky and tricky. And I think there are many of the residents of Lalor who would be giving him a hear today, because that's exactly how they feel about this tricky tax on petrol. Yesterday, the Prime Minister couldn't even fess up and admit that the effects of the announcement would be that if it fails to get its fuel tax legislation passed, that the collected excise would be handed back, not to the millions of Australian motorists who paid the tax, but to the oil companies. And it reminds me of the GST and what's happening with the premiers, what's happening to the states, with the notion of we'll do this, we'll cut your funding and we'll blackmail you into a conversation about a GST. This is exactly the same. This parliament is being blackmailed by bringing this in through regulation with absolutely no respect for the parliament. And if that wasn't bad enough, we discovered today, through the Abbott government's own repeal day documents, that the petrol tax ambush will be even wider. So the Prime Minister, who stood here again in question time today asking for a mature debate, has demonstrated that his behaviour is more like a child holding their parent to ransom. And in this case, it's this parliament being held to ransom and the families of electorates all over this country. And I stand here on this matter of public importance to say that the people of Lalor will treat this with the cynicism it deserves.